organizer.
This meeting is being recorded.
And if you could all introduce yourself as we're starting up here, and in the chat, that is, introduce yourself in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can put those in the chat throughout. We'll have a few different question and answer sessions as we go along. And could we start the slides?
Sure.
All right. All right.
Wow.
Thanks.
That's a big slide. Nice.
Yeah. All right. So this is the REPower the Peninsula series, and so we're talking about HEA's renewable energy goal of 50% by 2025. And so in this series, we're going through each of the technologies that can help get us there and talk about each one. Last month, we talked about solar. Next month, we're talking about hydroelectricity. This month, we're talking about wind. So anyone who is here over New Year's is well aware that the Kenai Peninsula is a very windy place. But we're going to look at exactly how windy. So this is from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It's a measurement of average annual wind speed at 50 meters above the ground. And off to the side there on the right, you can see that according to the U.S. Energy Information Office, a good wind speed for small scale home wind is about 4 meters per second. And for utility scale wind, it's about 5.8 meters per second. So on the map, that's those minimal wind speeds are the blue to tan and brown sections. And then above that is generally even better. So let's zoom in on the Kenai Peninsula. Next slide, please. And if you look here, you can see there's quite a lot of strong wind here. And the U.S. Energy Information Administration again says that favorable sites include the tops of smooth, rounded hills, open plains and water, and mountain gaps that funnel and intensify wind. So that describes a lot of our peninsula's geography and landscape. And but there is another issue to consider, and that's transmission. If you look at the map, you can see we have a lot of very strong wind in the mountains on the east side of the peninsula, but those are very remote and rugged places, very difficult to do big construction projects, and there's also the issue of transmission. But if you look at the rest of the map, you can probably spot a few places that have fairly good wind that meet our minimal 5.8 meters per second and are fairly close to transmission lines. One of these, next slide please, is the Caribou Hills down here, fairly close to the electrical lines that serve Homer, Anchor Point, and Ninilchik. And another one, next slide, is up here in the north, the East Forelands, which is near a generation station that HEA has in Akiski, and also close to the big power consumers and the industrial area up there. So these are in fact two areas where HEA is considering building wind. Next slide, please. They're actually on Tuesday, the board just approved grant applications for the Alaska Energy Authority Renewable Energy Fund to explore wind in 4 locations. These are 2 of them. And here are all the rest. There's the Caribou Hills, East Forelands, Ninilchik, and Summit Lake, which is up in the hills, and also I'm sure you're all familiar with Summit Lake Lodge. You drive past it when you go to Anchorage, so fairly close to the transmission up there. So Dave Thomas is going to tell us a lot more about these projects. But first, I'm going to talk about the grant itself a bit. This was a $15 million grant that was just appropriated, or not appropriated, but proposed in the governor's budget, which the legislature will have to pass this session. And applications are due January 18th. AEA is going to evaluate them in mid-March, make recommendations to the legislature in mid-April, And by late June, if AEA recommends HEA's grant application, and if the legislature appropriates the funds, we could see some of that 15 million going to one or perhaps more of these wind projects. So next slide, please. So David Thomas, HEA's Director of Strategic Services, is going to give us a bit of an overview of these projects. And again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So all right, that's the slideshow.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and see if I can share my screen here.
Quick question on the, before you get started on the mapping, Ben, was Seward evaluated at all, the Seward area or any side of the Eastern Peninsula?
That I don't know. Seward's outside the HEA area. So
what's going on with the screen? Is that your guys' screen? Are you guys flashing like I am?
I'm seeing the flashing as well.
There we go. That's a little bit better.
But yeah, I don't know if Seward has any wind projects in development.
But I mean, as far as HEA, has HEA looked at any of those areas?
I don't know.
All the sites were on the western side.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure David knows.
Okay.
Yeah. We did look at the entire Kenai Peninsula, as Ben alluded to. As you step any distance away from existing highways and transmission, the wind resource has to be better and better to justify that economic overhead of those millions of dollars per mile to step away from the existing infrastructure. Now that doesn't preclude a large project on a tasty mountaintop, but it changes the economics. Another thing that changes the economics is if it is not on our system, then we would pay transmission wheeling. We would pay to touch Chugach's transmission system and bring that power back to our members. So that would add a cost on top of the construction costs to the energy. So it doesn't preclude a project there, but it does add a cost layer.
Thank you.
And Seward is a little bit of a odd duck in that they have an all requirements contract with Chugach Electric. So they have diesel generation in town, just like our Soldovia generator. That's only there for emergency times, and they hope they don't have to use it. But generally, every day of the year, they're getting all of their energy from Chugach, and so theoretically, the accounting is that the power flows down from Anchorage to Seward. The electrons go where they go. So if you want to imagine you're using a bunch of Bradley power, you could, there's an argument to be made, but the way that the checks flow and the way that the contracts are is that Chugach energizes Seward.
Right.
Well, it looked like you had some slides for us, David.
Sorry?
It looked like you had some slides for us.
Yeah, let me see if I can share that. Share here. Okay, the screen. Okay, and you guys can now see my screen. I'll make it big, and there we go. Okay. So you know where we are. What is unusual about the peninsula is we are resource rich. We have vastly more per capita hydro production than anyone else on the Railbelt. There haven't been wind farms going in yet, but there is massive potential for that. You could put solar most anywhere, but the peninsula is one such location. Arguably, the Anchorage Bowl is probably not because of just a high per acre price, but otherwise, we have wind, solar, hydro here, and we have gas. Nikiski is gas central for South Central Alaska, and we have more. We have a number of thermal assets here as well. Generally, on the rail belt, most hours of the year, transmission northbound is constrained. The Chugach, Matanuska, and Golden Valley getting their Bradley power off the peninsula is at times an issue, and it is a constraint that is addressed in regional planning. And it would be lovely if there was more robust transmission, but there currently is not. The board developed a goal of 50% renewable. Part of the motivation for that is that we're currently 86% gas fueled, and that's a lot of eggs to have in one basket. That gas price varies, and it doesn't seem to go down. The nature of hydro projects, wind projects, and solar projects is you sign an agreement for 25 or 30 or arguably 100 years with a hydro project, and you know what you're going to be paying every year for decades to come. So it may have a contractual escalator in it, if you got your wind from a independent power producer, or it might be a flat rate, and that means inflation is going to make it cheaper and cheaper as the years go by. So there's a predictability to any of these renewable projects, because they're front end loaded on capital, but then the wind, the sun, the water is essentially free without terribly large maintenance costs. Our Tesla battery just was yesterday. We were stress testing it, did it in thirds, and had it jump in as if it were trying to save the system, and it did. It actually exceeded all of its nameplate specifications by a decent margin. So we're continuing with the commissioning, the testing. We're frankly learning how to drive that bus. We haven't had any schedule slipped in a few ways around having to provide warm storage for them, but it appears we got in every way a bit more of the battery than we bought, and that will be significantly increase our ability to take non-firm power from a project we execute or from someone else, in addition to saving us gas. The most clear-cut case for that battery energy storage system was we would be burning less gas because we could operate our thermal units more efficiently. And some of the things on our plate right now are we're prospecting for wind and solar. I'll talk more about the wind we're looking at right now. And we also, independent power producers contact us, have for years now, and will continue to. And we review their offerings, their prices, their terms, and see if that is a match for what we need, what we can accommodate. A little broad discussion of wind kind of over the last decade. You've seen wind go in on Fire Island, you've seen wind go in on Pillar Mountain in Kodiak. If you go further north towards Fairbanks, there's a facility at Eva Creek. And these wind turbines that went in roughly 10 years ago were 1.6 megawatt turbines. Turbine sizes keep increasing, so the hub height goes up, blade diameter gets larger. This both makes them more economical. The dollars per megawatt capacity keeps going down a little bit. These larger wind turbines also more efficiently capture the wind, so they're able to generate more usable energy in more conditions as they get more sophisticated airfoils, simply as the blades get larger. And so my top picture here are phase one of Kodiak's Pillar Mountain installation. And the bottom one is a larger 3.5 megawatt turbine, which is the sort of thing we're imagining if HEA were to execute their own project. It's also 2.5 to 3.5 megawatts is what I would imagine independent power producers would propose in their own projects. If Fire Island Phase 2, or I suspect many of the bids that Golden Valley got last month from IPPs were of these next tier larger size of wind turbines. Now, wind turbines are not firm capacity. We can't dispatch them. We only get energy, would only get energy when the wind blows. So we need other assets to follow the wind. We need other assets to generate exactly as many megawatts as our members are collectively using every minute of the day. So that means for us with our current fleet, it means our battery, it means our hydroelectric facility, the Bradley Lake, and our ongoing development of Grant Lake. And it means our combustion assets. Our combustion assets would increasingly move up and down to follow the wind. So what does it take to develop a wind project? You look for windy areas, but you don't look only at the windiest spots. You look at areas of moderate wind. You compare that and combine that revenue, that energy that's out there, with the costs for that site. And if it's a steep mountainside, construction costs will be high. If it's far from roads and transmission, then those connections will cost a lot. And you try to find sites that are in some sweet spot of a good wind resource for the costs it takes to get there. We have completed this first item of desktop level efforts, and we've actually jumped down to this anti-penultimate line, third from the bottom, pursuing some state grants to study, to collect actual meteorological data from these promising sites. But back to this ground truthing bullet. Sorry, I stole a verb from Aaron and Hig. But yeah, after the desktop level, you gotta make sure it is what you thought it is, and what the exact curvature on the roads, the slope of the roads, what are the foundations? Is it feasible to put foundations in that topography? And to start gathering those details. Promising sites can, you could cite a Met tower, a meteorological tower. Meteorological towers are unique to wind and different than solar. It's pretty easy to predict the solar input to a site, to a particular location, with data that's out there. And people will sell you solar panels and you can do your system design and you don't need to collect site-specific data. That is not true with wind. With wind, the standard is that you collect 12 months of meteorological data. It's not just the standard, it's basically the requirement. You want to know what energy you're going to get. You need to validate that desktop model, but you want to also need to know when you're going to get it, how turbulent it is, what wind shear, the difference between the winds at hub height and the winds at the tips of the blades, because that bears on what wind turbines you want to use, and it bears on what wind turbines the manufacturer will sell you. If you have a class 1 or severe wind environment, a manufacturer will not sell you some of their turbines, or at least would not warranty them. And if we can't warranty them for 20, 25, 30 years, we can't finance them and we can't put them into the rates. So one of the reasons for collecting meteorological data is to pick the right turbine, to provide the data that the manufacturer insists on seeing, and also our lenders. Our lenders are wonderful and trust us to an extent, and lend us money at very competitive interest rates, but we have to show that we've done our due diligence on any asset, on a transmission line extension, on a combustion asset, on a wind farm. We have to demonstrate that we've studied this, that this is the best path forward, and that the project will work. So there's a built-in 12 months of gathering data, and during that time, we're proceeding with preliminary design, land use, and talking to agencies regarding public land. But we don't wait 12 months for all the data to come in. Every month you're looking at the data again, refining the financial models, refining what your preliminary design is, and getting those numbers tighter and tighter, because you look at multiple sites at once. You have multiple horses in this race, and you want the strongest ones, the strongest sites to succeed, and you simply cannot know at the very beginning which site that is. Part of the financing of utility scale wind and solar are tax credits, and there are investment tax credits available for utility tied solar, and wind projects can take investment tax credits or production tax credits. Production tax credits pay them for the megawatt hours that they sell to a utility that they put beneficially onto the grid. Currently, HEA is a not-for-profit, so we can't monetize a tax credit because we pay no taxes. Part of the Build Back Better bill that's currently held up in Congress would allow for direct pay of a similar amount to municipals and not-for-profit cooperatives. So if that passes, that's lovely. Reduces the cost of the project. If it doesn't pass, then typically a more complicated structure, financial structure, is created where you bring in a tax equity partner, someone that has a large tax liability who can monetize that tax credit. And it is possible that it is likely that we will have some mix of projects that the cooperative finances and other projects that for-profit firms, independent power producers finance and construct. So that will be a balancing act between our lower cost of capital and the fact we can't make a profit on anything, versus the independent power producers who they want more for their money, they want to show a profit, but we have a limited ability to borrow funds. So where's our borrowing capacity best spent on projects that show the lowest cost of energy, and in what balance of that and on the private side buying energy from independent power producers is a modeling effort that's ongoing right now. So the sites themselves, as Ben said, we're looking at the western shoreline here of the Kenai Peninsula, Ninilchik to Happy Valley, and that was one location that was not the best wind resource, but right on our transmission and right on the highway. So that keeps the costs down. In the Caribou Hills region, a better wind resource and not horrible constructability. The slopes here are not bad. And it is not close to the highway, but Oil Well Road is a pretty substantial road, and decades ago some very big equipment got taken out on that road, and that gets us over half the way there. And the intertie from Bradley Lake comes right through here, and so it would be quite close to the transmission line that goes from Bradley Lake to our generation facility in Soldotna. The East Forelands area, both the very industrial area around the present and former refineries, fertilizer, gas plants, but potentially north from there as well. All of that is a moderately good wind resource. And again, like the other one on the highway system, just stone's throw from not just transmission and highway, but a very substantial dock in Nikiski. And also we have 2 substations in Nikiski because it's been such a large industrial load and our generation assets there. So we have two substations already there, and that saves $1 million transformer and some land use and some interconnects and switch gears. So that was another spot where good, not great wind, but kind of a cheapest place to build as we might find on our system. And Ben also pointed out the Summit Lake area. And so that is a very, very different prospect than these others. Extremely strong wind resource, but extremely high building costs when you get up to a 3,000-foot ridge and have to construct a road that you can drive a 240-foot blade on, bring a 120,000-pound nacelle, get the crane up there and do it, maybe get the road in one building season and get everything else in another building season. So stepping way back and sort of my bullet points here is these sites each have a different range of risk and reward, revenue and costs, and that is intentional. We could have picked 3 spots on the Caribou Hills. We could have picked 3 spots on the Western Shoreline. We could have picked a handful of mountainous ridgelines, but we intentionally selected sites with very different attributes because you don't know what hurdle you're going to hit this early in the process. And you want different horses in the race because you don't know you can't know everything about land use, costs, deliverability, highway transport, and so forth. So we have a range of sites that will push forward in parallel, continually revising the costs and the feasibility, and see which 1 or 2 emerge as winners. Here in the upper right is our Soldotna facility, and the building. It houses a 48 megawatt aeroderivative LM6000 gas turbine. There's some fire protection water there. And here are 37 Tesla megapacks. So this is our battery energy storage system. It's the largest battery energy storage system for 2,300 miles around until you get into Central California. And it will save us on our existing gas usage by allowing us to operate our gas units more efficiently, particularly for something called spinning reserve. We have to be ready to jump in with 10 megawatts at all times when we're connected to the northern utilities. And we need that. I mean, in a boat, you'd call it freeboard or throttle up or something, but we need that capacity above what we're currently generating, that if the system needs it, we can provide it. And when we're islanded, that amount needs to be 45 megawatts. We need enough assets, like Bradley and 2 combustion shafts, that can go from, if we lose one, that the others can jump in with 45 megawatts and keep the system whole. So that was one big driving force behind this battery energy storage system, because this is, I would say it's akin to if the passengers only need 2 cabs, you keep a 3rd cab idling at all times. you're running the engine inefficiently, you're putting hours on it, you're incurring labor and maintenance, all to be ready to jump in if anything should fail. And we, for months of 2019, when we were islanded, we were running Bradley plus Nikiski, but also a third shaft at Bernice Lake. And when we're islanded, we can burn $1,000 an hour more fuel than we will with the battery energy storage system ready to jump in. So it provides that spinning reserve in our future, where formerly we had to do that with our combustion shafts by constraining our combustion shafts operation. But as it relates to wind, that also means we have 46 megawatts that can jump in should the wind drop off. We have 93 megawatt, oops, sorry, typo, that's 93 megawatt hours. Fix next slide as we speak. 93 megawatt hours of energy storage. So that would carry our whole system, theoretically, just by the math, for an hour or two. That's not how we'd use it, but it does allow us to do some peak shaving. It would allow us to avoid a turbine start at times. Simply starting one of our turbines is about $4,000 more maintenance that you'll accrue. You're that much closer to your next major overhaul. So simply not starting a turbine or taking some excess wind in a period in the midday when our load is not high and shifting it to an evening when our load is higher or when the wind has fallen, that has value. But in fairness and in honesty, batteries do not make energy. Not only do they not make energy, they consume energy. They consume energy to keep themselves warm and happy. But when you start cycling energy in and out of it, you put 7 megawatt hours in, you'll get 6 out. So I caution people against imagining that a battery is a big magic black box that does all these things, frequency control and spinning reserves and peak shave and dampen out the ramp rate. It does do those things. It can't do all of those things at one time, and there's a cost to doing each of those things. So we factor that into our economics when we're looking at how much wind do we have. And this lower right is just some random utility modeling screen that I grabbed, but we are concurrent with assessing these wind prospects. We are modeling the effects it has on the rest of our system. And if we get the right amount of wind and sun at the right price, then that more than offsets the cost of the gas that we don't have to burn and these integration costs, and potentially, hesitate to say lower rates, but if we can keep rates stable, then inflation will lower rates in real dollars. So my hope is that some of these projects emerge to be so economically viable that, again, the gas it saves, less the integration costs, maybe we can get this wind for less than that. And we're in the process of taking several different approaches to model that and assess what balance of wind and solar gives us the lowest cost of power, matching it to our load on many levels. It's nice that the wind is about twice as strong in our winter months as it is in our summer months, because of course our load is higher in cold weather. But there are 8,760 hours every year, and every minute of all of those hours we have to be generating exactly as much electricity as our members use. So it will be probably a 6-month effort to model our existing assets and then play what if. This much wind, that much solar, this different wind prospect, and a little more solar, and look at these different combinations to, again, look for that lowest cost of power. So that was the overview I had, and happy to take questions. I haven't been looking in the sidebar, but if one of the facilitators could deal questions out to me.
Well, I'm curious, David, about you mentioned that the best wind sites aren't necessarily those with the strongest wind. What are the general characteristics of a good wind site? I know there's also turbulence to consider, and how gusty it is, and so what generally makes a good wind site, and how many sort of good or decent wind prospects have you found on the peninsula, and how did you narrow it down to these general
Sure.
areas you're looking at?
So in our most recent effort, we had some consultants in the Midwest, which is sort of where the center of U.S. wind production, assist us in the desktop modeling, and they developed a initial not fleet, but selection of 18 sites. And then with our local input on, I really don't think people at home are going to want that in their viewscape, and some considerations like that, we ruled out a few. And then to go from now 14 sites down to 4, where we wanted to both apply for these AEA Renewable Energy Fund grants, but also, regardless, we want to investigate these sites further, and get that preliminary design, get the meteorological data to prove them out or not. We were looking for diversity of risks. So if you have one criteria, if you say lowest cost of power for 30 megawatts site, then you're going to get a handful of sites, one ridge after another, that were in the same spot. But one of the criteria was that we have a variety of project sizes. So the Caribou Hills site, the Summit Lake site, because of those high logistical costs, those are more of a go big or go home, like 30 megawatts, or it probably doesn't pencil out. Where those ones that are on our transmission and our highway system, like 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts, 30 megawatts, are all possibilities. And that was another aspect of diversifying the risk portfolio, is you don't want only big projects, because what if our modeling effort says, well, really the right ratio is 15 wind and 20 solar, and maybe some wind from off our system. And we've gone down a path of only one large project, and it's too big. So again, that diversity of risk, but you're right, high winds aloft. And so a smooth ground surface helps. Like, you'd rather it be a cornfield than a spruce forest, but we don't get to pick that, right? So and hub heights are now about 400 feet. 386 feet on the towers we're looking at. So these are towers that are a little further up, getting into a little better wind and a little smoother wind than the Fire Island, Kodiak Island ones. It's more expensive to build on a mountainside. So the flatness of the site itself, so a sloping ridge or a plateau, is less costly to build on. A ridge is better in a valley because it gets you up into the better winds. Also, the slopes to get there, the cumulative slope, you find, if you were a lazy hiker, how would you hike to the top of that ridge? Right? You take the gentle slopes to get there, and the road will as well. Realize that we as hikers just can take switchbacks and 240-foot long blades cannot. So you have a horizontal radius that you're limited to, and you have a vertical radius because you can't you can't go over a dip with a extremely long load. So cumulative slope as you approach a site is an issue, and you'd like a nice smooth slope, and western shoreline and Nikiski, it's flat, essentially flat, no limitation there. These more mountainous sites, now more dollars are going into road construction, and the installation will be more involved and more costly.
Has HEA ever investigated the area around Bradley Lake for wind? Have you done any prospecting there?
Oh, we actually did a fairly detailed study there. We did not go so far as to put met data, but we went well beyond a initial desktop study and looked at the logistical costs, the cost of modifying the project road, the feasibility of getting northeast of the dam, and it's an expensive place to do a project. That you knew that going in, but quantifying it is such an expensive place to do a project that it would need to be an exceedingly large wind project. Like HEA could not take all of the output of it. And when you start going beyond that, if we're not going to use it on our system, if we're going to partner with everyone to our north, we love doing that. Bradley's a tremendous model, a successful model of doing that. But to add another Bradley worth of energy on the peninsula that everyone else needs to get north, the transmission isn't currently there. So if money fell from the sky and robust transmission was built from the peninsula to Anchorage and on to Fairbanks, then many prospects would look better. And actually in that future, if we had more robust transmission, you might see the peninsula really becoming a much even greater net exporter of energy. You see, Chugach Electric has their own renewable goals. Golden Valley has a carbon reduction plan, and we have multiple renewable resources down here, but we are currently transmission constrained.
And what are the issues with variability? Does the wind just sort of rise and fall randomly, or have we discerned any predictable patterns on a yearly or daily basis that we can sort of plan for?
So we have from the desktop studies, we have predicted energy per hour through the year. One reason for the meteorological data is to get more granularity on the minute by minute and sometimes 10-second data. How quickly does that energy go away? If 30 megawatts becomes 5 megawatts over 3 hours, that's a different answer than 30 megawatts going to 5 megawatts in 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Because however quickly it drops, something else has to respond just as quickly in the opposite direction. Now the battery can do that. The battery can respond in cycles, in 60ths of a second. But again, there's a cost to the battery, and there are limitations, not so much in its power output in the megawatts, but in its energy storage. Okay, so it got us through one dip in the wind, and it got us through the second dip in the wind, but can it get us through the third dip in the wind that hour? So that's some of the modeling that we'll be doing is given the wind variability of a particular site, how much of that can we incorporate? Because frankly, I know a megawatt's fine, and I know 60 megawatts is too much. But where in there is that sweet spot, 10, 15, 20, 30 megawatts is a modeling effort we're undertaking now.
Mm-hmm.
So that ramp rate is one issue. A surprisingly bothersome bit is that we need to nominate our gas deliveries 24 hours before we burn the gas. So you as retail electrical members, actually all of our industrial and our commercial members, you can just turn the lights on and the electricity will be there. And we anticipate that. We figure you'll all get home in the evening and start cooking dinner, and we have load projections. And we're ready to meet that need at all times. Our gas supplier wants to know in advance how much load we'll have, how much gas we'll be asking for. And so in this new future, we'll add a layer that, of course, 48 state utilities have already dealt with, but we will be looking at wind forecasts 24 hours in advance. And we will factor that into, well, if we're getting this tranche of wind, if we think we're getting 15 megawatts of wind for that hourly block, then that'll be that much less gas that we would nominate. And there will be times when we're scrambling because, the storm system moved a little slower than was forecast and the wind arrived 3 hours later than forecast. But there will be an aspect of this 24-hour ahead forecasting of wind and sun to build that into our dispatch model. Because right now it's a pretty simple dispatch model. We know exactly what our Bradley capacity and energy limits are. We know exactly what our thermal units can do. And we've learned what our members do on, we plug in, Tuesday night, February 12th, with a minus 20 temperature, and we'll get pretty close within a few megawatts of the load that we will see every hour of the day. And then we'll nominate our gas for that. So there will be that predictive element in the future. And then what else we were saying? The wind. Oh, coincident and non-coincident. So the one possibility might emerge from our modeling that we don't put 30 megawatts in one place, but we put 15 megawatts in one location and a different 15 megawatts in another. If they're not right next to each other, then they don't experience the same wind. The gust doesn't die at the same time. And if the gust dies an hour later, then you have that ramp rate and you've spread out that variability over time, over an hour or two. So we haven't gotten into the details of the modeling, but that is absolutely cost benefit. If you scatter your wind resource around a little bit with solar as well, right? If it's cloudy in Homer, it might not be cloudy in Nikiski at the same moment. Certainly the same cloud isn't going to go over two wind farms at the same time. But to minimize that variability makes it less expensive to integrate.
Well, given those constraints with integration and siting, and I know all these projects are up in the air, so to speak. But I guess what impact can wind realistically make on the renewable goal? Do you have any sort of guesses as to sort of what percentage of the demand it could possibly meet, up to 50% and beyond?
I think so. This is just me shooting from the hip without having anyone on staff having completed that modeling effort. But I imagine that with the Bradley that we've operated for 30 years, the Battle Creek we brought on 2 years ago, Grant Lake coming online in 2 to 3 years from now, with those hydro assets which help us follow the wind and the sun, that we're probably looking at something like nameplate 1 part solar, 2 parts wind. So 15 megawatts of solar and 30 megawatts of wind. Now realize that the nameplate, there's a capacity factor attached to each of these sites. So a 30 megawatt wind farm where it blows half the time is better than a 30 megawatt wind farm where it blows 1/4 of the time. And so a a good wind location is 30-ish% capacity factor. A great wind location is 50%. So I just want to throw that caveat out there that it's easy to focus on the nameplate capacities, but then you multiply that by that capacity factor to show you how much energy you're actually going to get through the years. I see that Hig has a question about if we had Met towers up, but not everywhere. It does certainly inform us of similar sites, and the closer the site, the more helpful it is. But it's not bankable data. I mean, literally talking to the bank about the loan and also talking to the manufacturer if it's not basically in the same project area. So if there's a site that we don't start collecting wind on, if we don't start collecting meteorological data on, then we still have to start that 12-month cycle before a project could be finalized and financed and equipment ordered and starting to be shipped. But more data is always good, and any data will be helpful validations of the desktop models. The desktop models have a lot of validation in Iowa, Texas, Dakotas, everywhere in the central time zone. That you can usually see a wind turbine on the horizon. So they've done many iterations of their models there. The same software is being used to model data in Alaska, but there are not nearly so many meteorological stations like at airports here, and our terrain tends to be more complex. So that validation through the 12 months of data is just all the more important.
And I see that Tim has a question about offshore wind, and I actually have a couple slides about that.
Okay.
So I'll dash through those, and then we can open it up to audience questions and answers. So
Dave,
yeah,
if you go ahead and stop your screen share, I will go to the other slideshow.
Sorry, stop share.
That's all right.
all right. Okay, so this is another map from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory of offshore wind power. Wind power is classed in 7 classes based on factors including speed. But without getting into the specifics of that, you can see that there's quite a lot of potential to the south of us in the sort of mouth of the inlet between here and Kodiak, and in Alaska in general. There's a lot of technical offshore wind resource. Next slide, please. NREL estimates that it's about 3.25 times the total annual U.S. electrical consumption, and about 2,000 times total Alaska's electrical consumption. But the resource is massive, but as usual, there are issues with getting it. So next slide, please. NREL also estimates that while they state that there are significant challenges. Obviously, working on the ocean is harder than working on land, and also the wealth of land available for onshore wind development is a sort of competitive factor there. So that's some context for offshore wind. We do know there's lots of resource, but I guess I'll ask David. Has HEA done any investigating of offshore wind, and is this a remote possibility, and what would it take to?
So we one of the sites that actually our consultant said this might pencil out, but which we nixed was the mouth of the Kenai River, kind of off Cannery Row, VIP. And we nixed it for, marine traffic and, aquatic critters and viewscape and a lot of stuff. And it wasn't economically super promising. They threw it in there for quite the variation on risk profile. But roughly offshore wind's about twice the construction cost of onshore wind. You know, I mean, imagine the cost just of building a dock compared to building a deck off your house. Everything's harder to do in a marine environment. Now, yes, wind speeds consistently are higher over that smooth water than over the rough land. The wind is consistently less turbulent over the water than the land. But what you see internationally is that offshore wind gets done where you can't do onshore wind. You know, say off, you know, the Connecticut or Massachusetts coast. Like you can't get the onshore sites to put these massive turbines up. So you go 5 or 10 miles offshore, or in a number of places in Europe where there's just not the wealth of undeveloped land that we have. Then often they get pushed into offshore development to meet their own goals and energy demands. So we've considered it, and it didn't take a lot of consideration to bring our focus back on land. And when you, I mean, these wonderfully dark blue areas you've got there, again, it's, you know, we keep saying $1 million a mile, and always ends up being a couple $1 million a mile when you do the detailed costs, and that includes undersea cables. And then there's another issue that what AC power transmitted through the water creates a huge capacitor, and now you're buying huge inductors to balance that out, or you're buying DC inverters and converters on each end, and now suddenly you've added 10 million to one end and 10 million to the other end of the project. So, you know, clearly it's done, but realize that it tends to be done on a much larger scale. You know, you're adding it to the European grid, or you're adding it to the entire UK grid, and well beyond the magnitude of anything HEA could accommodate.
All right, well, I'll finish up my slides here, and then we'll open it to free-for-all audience questions. So next slide, please, Satchel. So if you've been interested in what we've been talking about tonight, here are some opportunities for you to act on it. The next HEA meeting is February 8th, and I believe there's going to be some presentation about the renewable numbers that we've been generating. So that's something to put on your calendar. We also have a renewable energy discussion group that meets every Monday at noon. So my email will be on the next slide. Email me if you'd like a Zoom invitation to that. And also last week we heard from Jen Miller of Renewable IPP, or I'm sorry, last month we heard from Jen Miller, and the borough is still deciding about the tax exemption that she's seeking for independent power producers. So that'll be another future opportunity to participate in renewable energy. And of course, in the spring we'll have the HEA Board of Directors election. So that's, of course, is probably the most impactful way you can participate. Next slide, please. So next month we're going to be talking about hydroelectricity and energy storage. And my contact info is at the bottom of the slide there, ben@inthekeeper.org. So again, email me if you'd like a Zoom invitation to our renewable energy discussion group, or if you have any other ideas for ways we can act on all this good information we're getting. So with that, I'll open it up to audience questions for David or for anyone else we have on the call. We have at least 2 HEA directors here, so thank you guys for coming. And Hig has his hand up. So
Yeah, I was just curious, David, if you know you mentioned viewscapes several times. Is there any like polling or anything on this to like see what people actually care about? I mean, I've actually heard people being like, "Wow, it'd be cool if there were some wind turbines up across the bay." You know, like I think that I don't know that that's to my knowledge, it's not really a thing in Alaska that people are worried about that, but it could be. Maybe people are really worried about it. I have no idea, but I don't know. Do you have any sense of that?
I've certainly seen it be more of an issue in the 48 states. I mean, I look out in my lovely view across Cook Inlet and I see oil platforms. I'm cool with it. But to each their own. I'll just observe that, during public hearings, people rarely show up to be a booster. They usually, people that are upset about something are the ones that bother to show up. What we hear from our wind consultants who have been involved in scores of projects over decades is that viewscape can be a concern initially, and then once they get built, not only do people say, we don't care, but they actually start showing them off. I mean, I definitely know people are like, they go to Kodiak, let's go up Pillar Mountain, look at the turbines. So it sometimes becomes an attraction. It doesn't long-term remain a nuisance issue for many. That there are avian studies that are required during scoping and design, so that is addressed, and there is some mortality, but it in most settings pales to feral cats and windows on buildings. But yeah, so I again, there was one location where a lot of hillside Homer would have been looking through the turbine blades at the glaciers on the other side. So at that level, we thought, it's not the economically most promising one, and you want to pick your battles, and let's just move up the coast.
Maybe I'll just throw in a comment there
Sure.
while people are considering their questions. I think it's interesting just to contemplate, Alaska's we're used to being energy producers and exporters, and it's all sort of in under development. The ideas of like, okay, what if we started manufacturing ammonia to power container chips or something like that, using wind power. But when you start talking about the total resources is much larger, then that kind of opens up the question of like, maybe there's a future out there where HEA gets all their power as just a kind of an afterthought from some much larger project that's really focused on export, much the way that natural gas once was for Cook Inlet.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we got cheap natural gas for decades was not because of those of us who live here. It was because so much of it was going out as fertilizer and LNG. Any single mega project that we tag along on, be it an in-state gas line, be it a massive mining project, be it hundreds of megawatts of tidal power or offshore wind, that's frankly beyond your member-owned cooperative to start making green ammonia on a global scale. Like, I know we can't borrow that much money. I know it's outside of our expertise, but if someone else put a project like that together, well, we are the folks that energize the Western Peninsula. We would be a player in that and might tag along for all manner of benefits. I saw small aircraft concerns from Tim. So if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, on a strip under 3,200 feet long, you can't be within 2 miles. And on an airstrip over 3,200 feet, you have to be 5 miles away. So that creates no-go zones around existing airports. I didn't say in my presentation, but like I showed the board a map with half the peninsula blacked out. National parks, state parks, wilderness areas, just all manner of no-go areas, which now mostly they're so far from roads and transmission that we couldn't afford to go there anyway. But they are some of the very highest wind resources, those ridge lines and mountaintops. will be incredibly hard to build at, but it's a non-starter. You're not going to put a wind farm in a national park or wilderness area. So those were rolled out immediately, as are these areas around airports.
You know, and again, just with the Nikiski, the traffic that with Kenai Airport and the military using it and all that, you know, the National Guard and stuff. I was just curious about that, as if it was in any kind of air traffic lanes and stuff like that, and if that has been assessed.
And that is one of many parts of a preliminary design, is avian studies, and then you bring in FAA specialists to look at those concerns. And we're just not there yet. We're not that far along in the process. But it is, and again, it's one of those, another reason to have a variety of sites, so that if just the FAA is just a hard stop on something, that you've got other projects to pursue.
One last question, if I may. Has there been many IPP proposals to HEA at this point? Over 25K, what has it been, or Mark, 25 kilowatt that you have to have special permission for?
So the Electric Reliability Organization enabling legislation was Senate Bill 123, and that set a 15 megawatt limit, where you needed pre-approval once the reliability organization's up and going, and once it has an integrated resource plan. Then that integrated resource plan serves as sideboards to anyone else's large projects. It doesn't say you can't execute a large project that isn't part of the integrated resource plan, but the burden of proof goes on to the project developer. Okay. Be it an IPP or a cooperative or whatever. If you're going to build a big generation facility, you have to prove it's for the public good, and as good or better than what the integrated resource plan said. We get calls from independent power producers, and happy to talk to any of them. I've been waiting for Siri to return my call for a while on Fire Island. We've talked to some of the IPPs that develop plans for Golden Valley. Golden Valley put out a request for proposal, and I got eight responses. The project that frankly is the furthest along at this point, and I'll mention them by name because they're public about the fact they're talking to us, is renewable IPP with the proposed 20 megawatts of solar. So we're in discussions with them about the cost of integration, the appropriate project size, and then there are all manner of commercial terms, right? Who's going to buy what part at what price, and if we curtail it, who pays? And any of these deals have many commercial terms, as any contract would. But that's the one that they have been the most active and the most substantial of the parties we've talked to in the last few years.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Mark has his hand up.
Sweet, thanks, Ben. I'll put my hand down here, but I just wanted to kind of make a brief announcement here. First of all, David does a really stellar presentation. Thanks for getting that information. It's very insightful, and we look forward to some of these developments for Homer Electric. Very exciting. The the RSAC, the Resiliency and Security Advisory Commission for the borough, which Hig and I are both commissioners on. We passed a few resolutions yesterday in support of your guys' endeavors for seeking that AEA funding. So we're excited to see that development. And then also just wanted to let folks know that the MET data that Homer Electric will be collecting will also be available to public. So other folks that are evaluating different types of that data will have access to that, which is really cool for multiple reasons. And then just a kind of a overall PSA, this weekend at the landfill is hazmat recycling day, or day where you can get rid of those hazmat materials. So if folks wonder where, I got the reminder today, and I really need to make it over there. So just want to let folks know that. But thanks again, David.
Sure. And just a clarifying, the clarification on your comment, any AEA Renewable Energy Fund grants that we get, then that, for instance, we use to obtain meteorological data, then that data is public information. Yeah. If we don't, if it's not through that grant, then if we paid for it, we own it. And if you want to, do something for us that benefits our membership, then we'll talk to you. But not necessarily that all HEA data collection is public, but certainly any that's funded by a grant is public information.
Well, Tim, you have another question?
Nope, not at all. I was looking to see if anybody else had a question.
Well,
I have a quick question. I know you don't have a crystal ball, David, but if you were to know what you know about our legislature and budget, what do you think is the likelihood that this grant will get awarded, or some of this grant will get awarded?
I'm not. Most of my focus on legislative appropriations have always been like, what did it, as it bore quite directly on HEA. But I was encouraged to see that the governor proposed the 15 million, so that's more than in many of his previous budgets. I don't know the details of whether the bipartisan infrastructure funding plays into that. I know that there are federal dollars flowing, and that ultimately some of those flow through the state government to others. It did seem like there were more details, maybe earmarks on projects that needed matching funding. So it seemed like the state was stepping up in that realm a bit more. They almost missed a couple funding opportunities in the last year or two when they, axed something and realized that, there was just their 10% match, and they were leaving $9 on the table for every one they cut. So it did seem like the budget was a little less lean this time. It did seem like certainly the renewable energy fund was bigger than it had been. It is ranged from 0 to 100 million. There were a bunch of years where it was about 50, then there were some 25 million years, and some zeros. And my expectation is it stays at 15 or maybe goes up a bit, and then the governor signs it or he doesn't. But when they're ranked, and for people's information, they will rank these on the public benefit that each of these projects have the potential to do, to lower rates, to provide reliability. And so there'll be a list of dozens of projects, 1 through 40 will be ranked with their price tags. And then everyone grabs that list and counts up to 15 million and draws a line and says, oh, okay, 1 through 18 look like they're getting funded if it goes through the legislature. And sorry, number 19, you just missed. And then, of course, number 19 and 20 then go to their state house reps and say, hey, can you bump it up another million? Because we're next in line. But we should know early April whether we have prevailed in any of these requests. And just for completeness, because probably many of you are interested in this, we're also submitting a grant request for design funding for landfill gas. So that's a different pot of money. It doesn't compete with these feasibility studies on wind, because there's a separate design and construct pot, or a quarter of the 15 million is for design and construct. 3/4 of it is for resource assessment and feasibility. And we are not preparing, HEA is not preparing the application, but we have thrown in with and are supporting Trugatch's preparation on behalf of all the Railbelt utilities to look at the feasibility of Dixon Glacier, Martin River water being diverted to Bradley. So this would be additional water behind the dam. Presumably would include a third turbine, so that you could make use of all of that water. And I don't know if they're would be looking at transmission upgrades. It would seem like you'd want to again get that power off the peninsula. But that's a project. It's another drainage to the southwest of Bradley, that the glacier has receded so much that there's now enough state land on which to construct some water intake or power generation facility. So Dixon Glacier is, I know that's being submitted, and I'm sure there will be dozens of other applications going in from around the state.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll be staying online for a bit if anybody wants to generally talk about renewable energy or anything that we've discussed tonight. But if nobody has any more questions for our guests, then we'll call it a night. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to editing grant applications myself, but thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Ben. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Because I forgot to refill it after I